Hello, welcome back. This is the talk, lecture, whatever you want to call it, review session, perhaps, preparing for midterm two. You've already had midterm one, and so you have a sense of what the exams are like and my feedback on them. And so I hope you will take your feedback that you received on your exam on midterm one um, to heart and reflect on it as you're preparing for midterm two. Now, in the lecture review session, preparing for midterm one, I went through some of the expectations for the first part of the exam on the terms, and those basic aspects apply as well to the second midterm. So I'm not going to address the terms as such, except in more general terms later on shortly. But I want to focus particularly on the essay in this talk. So I'm going to again just read you the essay that you've had. I hope you've read as you're preparing for writing and submitting midterm two. But just to go through it with you to explain more about how I conceive it and what some of the expectations are, so you can perform your best on it. That is the goal here, for you to perform the best and show me what you have learned and how you can put it all together. And we go from there. So, if I can do this without screwing up the technology aspect of it, which for me is always a problem, but I'll do my best here. Here we go, midterm two, essay, part two, essay. Beliefs and myths fueled historical action and development from the Augustan Revolution to the onset of early modern Europe. How can we understand the beliefs and myths behind the developments of history? How are they manifested in historical actions and developments? Answer these questions based on the course material, the lectures in the textbook, in treating 1. The emergence and development of Christendom, and 2. The emergence and development of early modern Europe, parentheses, i.e., from approximately 400 to approximately 1600. Now that covers the whole time span for both of these aspects. If beliefs and myths were not the major historical factor driving historical change, what was? Be sure to give specific details and examples drawn from the textbook and the lectures. Okay, that is the task given you. Now, one of the lectures, and here I have the syllabus too. The lecture for week 9 is belief as an historical factor. So I certainly address the context, the conceptualization of what I'm meaning by beliefs and myths there. I also have discussed two primary myths. In the myth of Rome, which was also part of your first midterm, and then the myth of Christendom, which is part of this second midterm. And obviously, the final, as we'll be getting ready for the final as well, is comprehensive. And so this all builds together. Now, as I presented the myth of Christendom, it is or was the transformation of the myth of Rome, in that the myth of Rome was beginning with the Augustan Revolution. That was on the first midterm, meaning Caesar Augustus, and discuss the elements thereof in lectures and then preparing for the midterm one. But then when Christendom, or when Roman Empire became Christian in the later 4th century, officially with Theodosius in 391 to 394, excuse me, I have to sneeze. Oh boy. Excuse me. Okay. Oh boy, there's another one coming. I think it should be okay. I hope. Sorry about that. All of a sudden, things had changed because this myth of this eternal empire became a myth of a divinely sanctioned, as it was before already, but by the Christian understanding of God, by the Christian perspective of divine empire. And we already dealt with the question on the midterm, I forget exactly which, but certainly in discussions in the lectures, of did Rome become Christian or did Christianity become Roman? It was kind of a both and situation. And that's kind of the fusion that we're talking about. But these overarching myths are, in my view, as I've presented it, very important for understanding the developments of a people, of a nation, of a chronological period, because they provide the structures that people in that period just assumed was reality. I've also addressed the issue of myth in terms of myth being mythopoetic truth. It's not literal truth, but it's mythopoetical truth. And when that is believed as reality, that provides the basis for action, for comprehension, for making sense of your world. We could say that the American myth is one of equality, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and democracy and capitalism. Those are concepts, ideas that provide the context for what is America and how do we act as Americans? What can we expect and hope for as Americans? Sorry about this. My apologies. So that's what I'm really getting at with myth, that it's not a literal truth, but there is a truth there. Sorry. Now, within those overarching myths, there are smaller myths. We talk about the creation myths. We can talk about, the religion itself as a myth, and I've talked about that in terms of religion being in the realm of religio or mythopoetical truth. So it's difficult to really identify. We just can't dismiss it, saying, well, because this didn't really happen, that we can't say there's any evidence that this is what Christendom was. Therefore, we just dismiss it. I say no, because that was the basis for all of the development. It was this understanding at the time. Now, could there be differing understandings of that myth? Certainly, and I've addressed those as well. The emperor and the imperial side had a very different understanding of that same myth of Christendom as did the ecclesiastical side or the clerical side headed by the Pope. So when I said in the lecture, the question was over who ruled Christendom. Was it the Pope or the Emperor? Who had the final say? Who was really the vicar of Christ or the vicar of God? And I think I addressed in the lecture that the Emperor used to be referred to as the vicar of God, and then the Pope became, in the course of the 13th century, late 12th, 13th century, became the vicar of Christ. And that changes how people viewed things. Now, those beliefs, those individual beliefs or individual myths within the overarching myth are important too. What did Martin Luther believe that led him to stand up and confront Rome? How did that affect the development of European culture and society based on that belief? Was he right? That, as I argue, is not for the historian to answer, because that is a theological determination, not an historical one. The historian cannot say Luther was right and the medieval ecclesiastical structure and the papal monarchy was wrong. On what basis can we say that? Certainly not on a historical basis. We can, as historians, say that the document, the donation of Constantine, was indeed a forgery. It was not actually a document issued by the Emperor Constantine. That was known, as I've talked about, or surmised in any case. That we can, as historians, we can make that determination. But what we can't make the determination of is that true or false? I mean, is that right or wrong that the Pope should be the head of Christendom? It's a matter of belief. We believe things. And I think I addressed that in the lecture on belief as an historical factor. We believe things constantly. We believe the sun will come up tomorrow. We don't know that until it does. We believe, and I hope all of you believe, that you can do very well on this second midterm. I hope you do, because you'll do much better if you believe that than if you go into it and say, I believe that I'm going to fail. That's not a good way to go into an exam. So belief shapes actions, forms actions. Our actions come out of beliefs. Some are reflected beliefs, Some are conscious beliefs, others are implicit beliefs. When you get into your car and turn it on, you believe that it will work. Now, sometimes it doesn't, but you believe that it will. Because if you said, okay, I believe my car is broken, but I'm going to get into it anyway and try to get to the store, that doesn't make any rational sense. So we have these beliefs that what we are doing will produce the effects that we're hoping that it will. I hope this makes sense. So those beliefs are basic fundamental beliefs about everyday life, which is different from a philosophical belief or a theological belief or a religious belief. But beliefs are the basis of action, and beliefs are mental constructs. If I believe something, that is different from asserting whether that is true or false, or whether that is whatever. I don't even talk about right and wrong, because that is too is a belief. Now, we can talk about the truth of the Holocaust. Okay, that is not part of this course. I can use this as a good example. Is certifiable evidence that people who were part of a group that has been labeled the Nazis, led by their leader Adolf Hitler, put to death. I mean, not the people didn't, but the leaders did. Hitler and his cronies put to death over 6 million people, overwhelming majority of which were Jews. Not all of them were, but most of them were. About 500,000 other non-Jews were put to death as well, which is not insignificant, but comparatively, it was once. That is an historical fact that is discernifiable based on the evidence. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? Oh, of course, I think it was a horrible, absolutely horrendous thing. But the point of my argument here is that is a separate determination. How did it affect the rest of the world? That is a separate determination. But what we can look at historically is the impact, the discernifiable, verifiable impact of those acts on subsequent acts by individuals, by states, by nations. That's what we can look at historically. Was it good that the United States won World War II? We can say, well, first of all, the United States didn't win World War II. They were on the winning side. They made a big contribution, but it wasn't like they came in and won it all by themselves. Or we can say, well, yes, they did. We can argue about those things. But those beliefs are behind the actions. Why did the U.S. enter the war? Because we believed that it was necessary for our own preservation, especially after Pearl Harbor, that we needed to get involved. Was that a fact? We don't know, because we didn't choose that route. We didn't choose to remain in isolation and say, no, we're not going to get involved. Okay, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Okay, what do we do about it? Let's just hunker down because they're fighting over there and they'll end up killing each other off and we'll be all fine and dandy without having to get involved. That could have been a position, and actually it kind of was a position. But after Pearl Harbor, the sentiment changed and switched to no, we have to get involved because it was based on a belief. We don't know the outcomes of beliefs. We don't know the outcomes of our actions and our choices that we make when we act. All we can do is believe that if we do X, it will lead to A, B, and C. So what I want to look at as an historian, that's why I find it so fascinating, is what were the beliefs behind the actions that comprise the events that comprise history. Now, I hope that is enough in terms of myth and belief. Myth is the overarching structure. I think I've related it, maybe I didn't, but in some ways it's like with computers, and I know very little about computers, so this may not work at all. But to the operating system, the general myths that I'm talking about are like the operating system, they're like Windows. And individual beliefs and myths on a lower scale are like individual programs within the operating system. Now, I've explained to you about the extent of my knowledge of how computers work, which is, zero. I'm sure all of you know much more than I do. So if that doesn't really work, please ignore it. But that's based on my understanding, little that it is, that's kind of an analogous comparison. A myth, a general myth like I've been talking about, is like the operating system. And the individual programs are either sub-myths, little myths, or beliefs or beliefs. That's how it's put together. So if that is the overall structure, then let's look at the chronological development. The myth of Rome, obviously, as I talked about, goes back to the Augustan Revolution. That's mentioned here too, but that is not part of the exam for midterm 2. I say from approximately 400 to approximately 1600. So we take the myth of Rome as a given when we start out to answer this question. You can refer back to it. You can say the myth of Rome that developed under Augustus, blah, 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 and then became transformed into the myth of Christendom. That's what I want to get at. How did that transformation take place? And if we look at the schedule of lectures, I don't even, it's here, there it is, there, the schedule of lectures. The first lecture after midterm 1 is Christendom. And that is where I talk about the transformation of Rome, the myth of Christendom. And so it goes from that early period to basically through the emergence and development of early modern Europe through up to approximately 1600. So that's what this is getting at. From the Christianization of Rome, Theodosius is proclaiming Christianity the only legal religion of the Roman Empire. We go through the so-called fall of Rome, I address that in the lectures. Rome never really fell, but that's a historiographical construct. But what led to that transformation? And how did that develop? And if we go through the list of terms to know for midterm 2, that will be your guide because there's too much material. There's absolutely too much material. So use the list of terms to know as your guide for answering the essay question. And you can use it as well for your guide to answering the short essays for the IDs of terms, because the context matters. And so more of those terms that you can get into there, the better it is. So if, the term, one of the terms, I just have to go back here to the exam. One of the terms here is what? It is Charlemagne. We also have the Franks. Now you can talk about Charlemagne, you can talk about Muhammad, you can talk about Clovis, all in terms of the Franks, and Charlemagne, even though those terms are not on the five, or not one of the 5 terms. So the more of the terms that you can bring in dealing with the context of each of those 5 terms on the exam in part 1, the better it is. And then that list of 40 terms for midterm 2, use as many of those as you can for answering the essay question. Now, if you look at the syllabus too, you see that the lectures on the slave trade and the age of exploration and the slave trade and absolutism are there as well. I mean, this is really the lion share of the course in many ways. The first part up to the first midterm kind of sets the foundation. This is the real chunk of it. And then what comes here after, which is only a couple of lectures, and then the final, is the aftermath and providing the background and the foundation for history of Western civilization too, modern Europe and further. So that's what this is about. So make sure when you're talking about the emergence and development of early modern Europe, you include that material. You say something about the slave trade. What was the belief behind the slave trade? Were slaves non-humans or lesser humans? Now, I don't believe that for a second, and it's biologically verifiable that that is absolutely not the case, that they're less than fully human. But that was the belief, and that was the question. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this in the lecture on the slave trade or not, but when I was teaching this course, actually, it was part of the second part of this course, but at another university, University of Tennessee. I wish I remembered this volume, but I got out from the library a volume of letters from the Dutch West Indies Company. The Dutch West Indies Company were part of the slave trade on the west coast of Africa. And these were letters from people on the ships, captains, people who were working. And there's one that really struck me, and I wish I had kept it, made a copy of it and kept it, but I didn't, because it was this good Dutch Calvinist, struggling with the question. He said, if these Africans are fully human, we have a problem, because they were created then in the image and likeness of God, just like we were. Now, if they're not, then we can treat them like we are. But if they are fully human, what are we doing? And that was a dilemma at the time based on ignorance, based on belief, based on questioning beliefs, but led to all of that. That is within this overarching operating system of Christendom, which is beginning to change, because a third overarching myth that I talked about in terms of these lectures in this part of the course was the myth of the nation state, and how the myth of Christendom became transformed into the myth of the nation state. That leads to absolutism, mercantilism, the age of discovery, as it's supposedly called, the colonialization. All those aspects lead to and comprise the new myth of the nation state that I talk about. So 3 operating systems you need to address. Myth of Christendom, based on the myth of Rome, and then the myth of the nation state. Transformation from the myth of Rome to the myth of Christendom, and then the transformation of the myth of Christendom to the myth of the nation state. This is not simply saying, what do people believe about the Pope and the Emperor and Luther and Calvin and the Reformation? That is part of it. But it's more than that. That's why I say the amount of information is overwhelming. This goes in your textbook from halfway through or so, chapter 7 through chapter 15. There's a lot of material. There's a lot of material presented in the lectures. How do you get through it all? The list of terms to know. Now you can go beyond the list of terms to know. That's always a good thing. You can certainly do that. But that is what, let's say, the list of terms to know is in some ways the minimum expectation of the information that I would expect you to know to be able to answer the questions. Now, again, I think I addressed that before. I don't do it quantitatively. I don't say you have, there are 40 terms here, so if you mention 36 of them, you get an A. And if you only mention 32, you get a B. I don't do it that way whatsoever. But it should be an indication of you in terms of what I expect you to know and what I expect you to deal with on your exam. And I hope that helps deal with this question. Now, if you say, though, because there's that other part of the question that's involved, if you say, no, I don't really think it's myths and beliefs that drive history. I think it is economics, for example. Or you could say, I think it is philosophy. Or you could say, I think it's theology. And we could talk about, because there are things, I would argue there is a difference between theological statements and statements of belief. So that there is an issue there. But let's just take the economics, or you can say pure power politics. It's power that drives. I could say one thing, okay, well, power isn't then a belief in power. Economics is more fundamental. If you can say, okay, it's the people who control the means of production. This is Marx's position, as opposed to the labor that produces production. So you have this split between the labor and capital. Is it between the people who are struggling just to survive and those who are wealthy, the rich and the poor? That you can argue that is what is the driving force of history. You can argue that. You're still going to need to deal with then why is it the economics rather than the myths and beliefs. You can do that. You just can't ignore the rest of the question. You can't say, no, it's not myths and beliefs, it's economics, and I'll talk about all the economics. Great, but you need to do more because you need to take into account to the other evidence also presented in lectures and textbook to strengthen your argument. And that could be a fantastic argument. Again, there's no right or wrong answer on this. Okay? It's how do you all put it together? How do you put it all together? As well as how do you all put it together? I'm doing really great here, aren't I? So I hope that helps. And so if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And again, I'm happy to read drafts in a timely fashion on a first come, first served basis. So that is kind of the context. Be sure to cite the textbook and the lectures in your answers, both with the terms and with the essay questions, because the basis for your grade is the course material. The course material consists of the lectures and the textbook. I almost don't feel a need, shouldn't be have to repeating this, but I just want to remind you, you do not need to do any other research. You do not need to bring in any other material. I'm not saying you can't. If you do, you need to cite it appropriately in footnotes. For the lectures in the textbook, you can just put in parentheses Spiegel-Fogel page 226. We can say, lecture week 6, page 5. That, if I'm not sure you get pages on as it's posted, I think it's still a Word document, so I think you get the pages. But that is the evidence that also shows to me that you've actually done the work, and that helps with your grade because it is presenting the evidence. How do you know that if you make an assertion? I know that because you stated it in one of your lectures. Here you go. And here's the reference for it. Okay. Does that make sense? Because that is just a help to you, and it's not. I don't think it should be an onerous issue in terms of just adding a parenthetical reference within the text as you go, but it can make a big impact on your grade because it shows that you are making an argument, that you're presenting your evidence, and that you're basing your argument on the evidence, on your analysis of the evidence. And that is what I want to see. It is not, again, a right or wrong answer. It is how well do you defend a position in dealing with the case that is given you. So I would also suggest that you go back and reread, maybe again for the third or fourth time, the document historical argument. Say, okay, how can I really formulate my essay as strongly as possible? That's what this is about. Okay? So again, that's about all I had to say for this. I'll be doing another one of these and preparing for the final. That I hope will help as well. And as always, if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to me. We can talk about things. If there's any problems you have, they're always dealt with better beforehand rather than after the fact, so to speak. And I wish you the best of luck, and I'm looking forward to reading your exams. And yeah, I hope you'll enjoy doing this. I know I say that tentatively because an exam is like, did I ever enjoy my exams? Not really, but when I look back on it, it's like I kind of did because it's like getting ready, for a sporting event. All the practice and the work and the workouts that are hard and sweat and they hurt, and then you get into the event and you want to win. And do you win? Okay, yeah, but a lot of hard work goes into that. But it's also can be fun. So I know, believe me, I do realize how almost perverse this may sound. Try to have fun with this exam. Try to look for what might make you can get excited about, a theme, a topic, and bring that and use that fun to help you do the work needed that you can perform to your very best and get the best grade you possibly can. Okay? So again, final word. Any questions? Now I've repeated that for the 5th or 6th or 7th time. Just reach out. Good luck. I wish you all the best, and I'm looking forward to reading your exams. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.